Well, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Sabbath to all of you. We got a full house here today. This looks nice. It's a beautiful sunny day outside. Lots of people milling about we don't usually see, so we're very thankful to all of you ABC students and various people who usually come along and tag along with an ABC class that comes along. Thanks for coming up to Indianapolis. It is time to go ahead and begin services, though, so let's go ahead and, if you're using a hymnal, go ahead and stand. Otherwise, the songs will be up to my left, your right. And we'll turn to page 145 to get church started off today. Page 145, I Sing the Mighty Power of God. Page 145.
I sing the mighty power of God that made the mountains rise, that spread the flowing seas abroad and built the lofty skies. I sing the wisdom that ordained the sun to rule the day. The moon shines full at his command, and all the stars obey. I sing the goodness of the Lord that filled the earth with food. He formed the creatures with his word, and then proclaimed them good. Lord, how thy wonders are displayed where'er I turn my eye. If I survey the ground I tread, or gaze upon the sky, there's not a plant or flower below that makes thy glories known. That clouds arise and tempests blow by order from thy throne, while all that borrows life from thee is ever in thy care. And everywhere that man can be, thou God art present there.
Very good voice. It sounds really good up here today. Let's go for our second hymn to page 188. Page number 188, Crown Him with Many Crowns. Page number 188.
Crown him with many crowns, the Lamb upon his throne. Hark how the heavenly anthem drowns a music but its own. Awake my soul and sing of him who died for thee, and hail him as thy matchless King through all eternity. Crown him the Lord of life, who triumphed o'er the grave, who rose victorious through the strife, for those he came to save. His glories now we sing, who died and rose on high, who died eternal life to bring, and lives that death may die. Crown him the Lord of lords, to him our voices raise. Crown him the Lord of peace and might, who over all does save. To thee be endless praise, for thou for us hast died. Be thou, O Lord, through endless days, adored and magnified.
All right, just a few pages back. We'll save a little energy that way. Page 179 for our third hymn. Page number 179, Be You Holy. Afterwards, we're going to be led in the opening prayer by Mr. Bill Washburn. Page 179.
Be you holy, for I am holy. No, I've not redeemed you with silver and gold. blood of my Son, the one slain before earth's foundations were formed. Be you holy, for I am holy. Live my royal law and my spirit renew. You are the chosen temple of God. Let my Holy Spirit dwell richly in you. Be forgiving and tender-hearted, so justly love mercy, walk humbly with me. You're my beloved, you are my sons. Be holy and blameless till my kingdom comes.
Please remain standing for the opening prayer to be brought to us by Mr. Bill Watt.
Thank you, O dear Lord, for this your Sabbath day and the wonderful rest that it brings us from our week. Thank you also, Lord, for this congregation, the spirit that helped lift me at the end of this week. And open my heart and mind, Lord, and open all of our hearts and minds that we may hear the message you have for us and be guided by them throughout our life. Watch over those who can't be here today. Let them feel your healing touch and let them hear your message also. All these things, Lord, we pray in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.
I'd like to say welcome again. It is a privilege to have all of you over from Cincinnati, and we appreciate you coming up here. To introduce the ABC Choir and the songs they'll be doing today, we have one of our own coming back to us, Mr. Dustin Howie.
Good afternoon, brethren. I'll say it's really great to be back. And speaking on behalf of the whole choir, we really thank you so much for inviting us over. We really appreciate all the opportunities. Our first song we're going to have today is called Worthy of Worship, performed by the ABC Chorale. Words by Terry W. York, music by Mark Blankenship. The second song we'll be singing, Lord, It Is Good to Sing Praise, by the ABC Chorale. Words and music by Joseph M. Martin. Number 3 will be As the Deer by one of our own, Anthony Lopez, with a guitar solo. Music by Martin M. Nystrom, arranged by Jim Greening. Fourth song we'll be singing is Blessings, formed by the ABC Women's Group. Words and music by Laura Story. Number 5 is He Is, which will be a vocal solo by Chris Herman with a CD company. Words and music by Jeff Sylvie and Jeffrey Ben. Number 6 will be Make Us One, will be performed by the men's group a cappella. Words and music by Sally DeFord. Number 7, A Future and a Hope, performed by the ABC Chorale. Words and music by Sidney Barry, based on Jeremiah 29, verse 11 through 13. The last song we'll be singing is Healer Land, performed by the ABC Chorale, arranged by Tom and Robin Brooks, directed by Mr. Ken Shoemaker, and a piano accompaniment by Garrett Finchel.
Worthy of praise, worthy of honor and glory. Of all the glad songs we can sing, worthy of all of the offerings we bring. You are worthy. sustainer, you are worthy. Worthy and wonderful, worthy of worship and praise. Worthy of reverence, worthy of fear, worthy of love and devotion, worthy of bowing and bending of knees, worthy of all this and added to these. Almighty Father, Master and Lord, King of all kings and Redeemer, wonderful Counselor, Comforter, Friend, Savior and Source of our life without end. You are worthy. Father, Creator, you are worthy. Savior, Sustainer, you are worthy. Worthy and wonderful, worthy of worship and praise. You are worthy. Father, Creator, you are worthy. Savior, Sustainer, you are worthy. Worthy and wonderful, worthy of worship and praise of praise. Worthy of praise. Hallelujah. Lord, it is good to sing and shout your glory. Lord, it is good to lift your name on high. Lord, it is good to sing a wondrous story. Yes, it is good to worship God with heart and soul and mind. Oh, it's good to hear our hearts in worship. Oh, it's good to bring a voice and strong. Oh, it's good to show thanks with service. Lord, it is good to lift joyful song. Lord, it is good to lift wonderful, marvelous jubilant and song. Hallelujah. Sing to the Lord of hosts. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Sing to God. Rejoice, the Lord is King. Your Lord and King adore. Rejoice, give thanks and sing and triumph evermore. Lift up your hearts, lift up your voice, rejoice again, I say rejoice. Lift up your voice, rejoice again, I say rejoice. Lord, it is good to sing and shout your glory. Lord, it is good to lift your name on high. Lord, it is good to sing a wondrous story. Yes, it is good to worship God with heart and soul and mind. Lord, it's good to hear our hearts in worship. Lord, it's good to bring voices strong. Lord, it's good to show thanks with service. Lord, it is good to lift joyful song. Lord, it is good to lift wonderful, marvelous, jubilant song. Lord, it is good. Lord, it is good. falls through tears. One of my clouds and sleepless nights are falling. Takes a lot for me. What if I break my heart? 28 after 5 is a revealing of the grace that blesses the He's a shepherd in John and in Jude. Revelation, He's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He is Prince of Peace, Son of Man, Lamb of God, the great I am. Alpha and Omega, our God and our Savior, is Jesus Christ the Lord. And when time is no more, we stand in uncertainty, with our hearts searching for them. Now we walk in the purpose, our born and as we pass through mortal sorrow, how shall our hearts abide the day? Where is the strength the soul may borrow? Teach us thy way, teach us thy way. Make us one, that our burdens may be light. Make us one, as we speak eternal life. Unite our hands to serve thy children well. Unite us in obedience to thy will. Make us one, teach us, Lord, to be of one faith, of one heart. Now our soul is filled with charity, and now all hate and anger cease. And so we strive amid adversity, and shall we find thy perfect peace. So shall we stand, despite our weakness. So shall our strength be strength enough. We bring our hearts to thee in meekness. Lord, wilt thou find them in thy love? Make us one, that our burdens may be light. Make us one, as we speak eternal life. Unite our hands to serve thy children well. Unite us in obedience to thy will. Make us one, teach us, Lord, to be of one faith, of one heart, one faith.
of me. His heart of gold, and makes it glad, even as I know. Sing Christ, compassion, as my spirit touch. Give us one heart, give us one mind. Lord, make us thine, oh, make us thine. Make us one, that our burdens may be light. Make us one, as we seek eternal life. Unite our hands, to serve thy children well. Unite the sin obedience to thy will. Make us one, teach us, Lord, to be of one faith, of one heart, one faith. One in
Just before today,
I will lead and guide you as you follow in my way.
let me show you unfailing love. Just come and take my hand. I will use you for my glory, according to my perfect plan. I have plans for you, plans for good and not for evil. I have plans for you, to give you a future and a hope. As your Father and Creator, I know your every need. You will find my love and mercy as you follow where I lead. I have blessings in store, greater than you ever could imagine. I have love for you, more than you could ever comprehend. As you keep your eyes on me, you will clearly see that I have great and glorious plans for you. When you follow my name, I will listen.
You are my child, I know your every care.
When you see me, you will find me. Just lift your belong. I have plans for you to give you a future and a home. As your Father and Creator, I know your every need. You will find my love and mercy as you follow where I lead. I have blessings greater than you ever could imagine. I have love for you more than you could ever comprehend. As you keep your eyes on me, you will clearly see that I have great and glorious plans, for I hold you in my hands. I have great and glorious plans for you. I have plans for you. If my people humble themselves and pray, if they seek my grace and humble themselves and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin. I will hear from heaven and heal their land. Lord, heal our land. Father, heal our land. Hear our cry and turn our nation back to you. Lord, heal our land. Hear us, O Lord, and heal our land. Forgive our sin and heal our broken land. Lord, we bow our knee, we humble ourselves and pray. Lord, receive your grace, we humble ourselves and turn from our wicked ways. Father, in your mercy, forgive our sin. Father, in your mercy, come heal our land. Lord, heal our land. Father, heal our land. Hear our cry and turn our nation back to you. Lord, heal our land. Hear us, O Lord, and heal our land. Forgive our sin and heal our broken land. Oh, beautiful for men of faith who founded this great land. Proclaim for us in God we trust and held to God's strong hand. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, till lives confess his righteousness, from sea to shining sea. Heal our land, Father, heal our broken land.
Well, as that's coming down, I'd like to say thank you again to them. As somebody who is completely not musical, I have had numerous times where I've been deathly afraid that something's going to go wrong when I'm up here leading songs or whatnot. So I very much appreciate their ability to work through it, and that was really nice of them to be able to do that for us. So thank you very much to the ABC Choir and coming out here and sharing your talents with us. We'll go ahead and take our time now to sing as a congregation, and we'll go ahead and stand again. I don't know how long this takes to warm up. If you have a hymnal, we're going to be going to page number 9. How long you need? Oh, there we go. Perfect. Page number 9. Declare his works to all nations. Page 9. I will sing, O Most High, praises to thy name with my whole heart, and proclaim thy wonders great. I will rejoice and exalt in you. My foes fall at thy sight, for thou hast maintained thy cause and my cry. God will judge from his throne. He shall remain forevermore. God will rule uprightly, judge the world in righteousness. The oppressed who seek him, he will to them a refuge be. For the Lord will not forget those who put their trust and confidence in him. To the Lord sing his praise, declare his words to all nations. God most high in Zion dwells, he will not forget his people. They declare thy great works, and he will not forget their cry. Rise, O Lord, put them all in fear, for the nations that forget that thou art God. Judge them, Lord, in thy sight. Let the nations know they are but men. Go and please be seated for the announcements and introductions going forward. Our pastor, Mr. Bart Bornhorst.
Thank you, Mr. McNeely. Happy Sabbath, everyone. Oh, what a wonderful Sabbath it is, too. It's great to start off the Sabbath services having the ABC chorale up and performing for us, and what a wonderful job you all did. Thank you very much for your trek up to Indianapolis. I was sitting there thinking what a blessing it is to be able to enjoy the ABC chorale year after year. When you think about how our congregations are scattered across the United States, there's not too many congregations to get to hear the ABC chorale even once. And yet places like Indy and Cincinnati and Dayton and other cities and churches surrounding Cincinnati have that opportunity to hear the ABC chorale every year, and it's certainly a blessing. We appreciate it very much. So thank you to the ABC chorale for coming up. We do appreciate it very much. Also want to extend a welcome to Mr. and Mrs. McNeely. They're here visiting today. Mr. McNeely will be giving a sermonette here shortly, and we certainly look forward to that. And thank you for coming up. Also, I want to say thank you and welcome also to our guests and also to the Fort Wayne congregation. They're tuned in today. If technology works as it's supposed to, they're tuned in for today's service up in Fort Wayne so they could enjoy the ABC chorale and to hear Mr. McNeely speak in just a bit. And thank you also for Mr. Shoemaker. I know he puts in a lot of hours in helping with the ABC chorale. We certainly can tell the fruits of your labors, and we appreciate them very much. We do have a number of announcements today. I'd like to jump right into those. First of all, in the prayer request variety, as I'm sure most of you are aware, we held the funeral for Mr. Tom Piney this past Thursday, and the funeral went very well. It was a very fine funeral, and it paid all of his children and some of his grandchildren spoke of the memories that they have developed and cherished growing up with Mr. and Mrs. Piney, and it turned out to be a very fine tribute to a fine man. Mrs. Kathy McClure sent me an announcement from the prayer request, an announcement from the family. It says, the Piney and McClure families wish to thank you all for the outpouring of love and support you have shown us during this difficult time. We can't tell you how much comfort there is in the embrace of the loving arms of our church family. We can't, your prayers, cards, flowers, food, acts of kindness, and encouraging words have meant so much to us. It warms our hearts to know how much Tom was loved and admired. His legacy lives on in each one of you. We love you all dearly. And I would just add, if you don't mind, please continue to remember Mrs. Piney and the family during the coming days and weeks, because it is a difficult time after a loved one passes. Also, we have a card here today. I'll try to remember to put it out on the information table from the Elsies. It's a thank you card. They did include a note inside the card. I'll read that for you. It says, thank you all so much for the thoughts and prayers and cards and visits during the recent death of our granddaughter, Taylor. Everything is greatly appreciated. Lowell and Sue Elsie. Again, I'll try to remember to put the card out on the table for us. We do have a number of regular announcements to go through today as well. A couple lengthy feast announcements, and these are, well, first of all, let me ask for a show of hands. How many are planning or possibly planning to go to the Turkey Feast site this year? Okay, we'll skip that announcement. If you're interested, in the Turkey Festival announcement, please see me after service, and I'll be glad to forward that information on to you. That'll save us some time. There is one that does apply to us all, and that the Home Office has decided to conduct not just the feast registration, but also acquiring your housing for the feast a little bit different this year. So if you would pay special attention to this following announcement. Because although it is early this year, all Feast of Tabernacles sites are finalized and planning can begin. A list of all feast sites is available online at feast.ucg.org. For 2015, housing reservations in the United States and Canada will be different than previous years. This year, everyone is expected to be approved to any site that they apply to. Because of that, members will be able to make housing reservations in advance of registration. And that's what's different. Usually, we would have the registration sometime shortly after the spring holy days, and then they would set a date for you to be able to make your housing reservations. But that's different this year. They go on and says, because of that, members will be able to make housing reservations in advance of registration. Registration is needful for planning purposes, but registration will not begin until next month. The registration will take place sometime next month. However, this coming week, starting March 10th, those needing early housing reservations can begin the process. If you think you qualify to make preliminary festival housing reservations, please see your pastor or festival advisor for the guidelines. And here locally, that would be myself as the pastor or Mr. Carl Rothenbacher as a festival advisor. Your pastor or festival advisor will provide you with a list of approved housing at the site you are interested in attending. Here's the process for early housing. Members needing early housing should check the list of sites in the U.S. and Canada by going to feast.ucg.org. If you do not have online access, check with your pastor or festival advisor. Members should ask their pastor or festival advisor for a list of the approved housing at the site they will attend. Those needing early housing can begin calling on Tuesday, March 10th. All other members can begin making housing reservations the following week on Monday, March 16th. and the entire festival planning brochure will be posted online. I'm not sure if it's there yet. It wasn't the last time I checked, just a couple of days ago. If you have a question about whether or not you qualify for early housing, I'll just quickly run through. There's really 3 main points to qualifying to make early housing reservations. Number 1 is if you have a handicap need, and they ask that handicap need be that you require a room on the first floor. If you're staying, for instance, in let's say a condominium or a motel that has multiple floors and they have an elevator, then maybe the handicap need doesn't apply. So you can make your own decision there. But first of all, it's for those that are handicapped. Secondly, for financial reasons, if you need to find housing that fits for you and your family, that is of the cheapest variety, then you're certainly welcome to apply for the early housing in that regard, if you need the cheapest housing as opposed to the more expensive rooms. Also, thirdly, is for families of 6 or more. And they ask that those 6 people be in that household, not your brother that lives in another state and your daughter that lives in this state over here and you're all getting together. They ask that it be for families of 6 or more in the same household. If you have any questions on that, please, again, feel free to see myself or Mr. Rothenbach. Before we go to the bulletin, Mr. Gordon Brockler wanted me to let you know that he is planning to reserve a room for the night to be much remembered up in Noblesville, Indiana. It's at the Stone Creek Restaurant. I believe from my discussions with him that he's had it there for several years in the past. He said it's quite a large room. He said it's at least as wide or as long as this room is wide and probably half that in width. So it sounds like a very nice room. And it's at the Stone Creek Restaurant, and it's located at the Hamilton Town Center Mall. And Gordon said if you're interested in being a part of that night to be much remembered dinner, please go ahead and see Gordon on that. You would take your bulletin. We have a couple announcements to cover in there. One correction for next week, and this is a correction because it was just developed late this last week. But for next week on the sermonette slot, it shows it'll be Carl Rothenbacher. Instead of that, we've now decided to show the United Youth Camp video next Sabbath during the sermonette time. I believe Carl's aware of that. Inside on the bulletin, very important, remember tonight you need to set your clocks forward 1 hour. Make sure you get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to do that. Any other time is not acceptable. Just kidding, of course. There is a ladies' luncheon that's scheduled for March 18th. And there's a note in there that says, please let Frida Carlson know if you plan to attend. We did have a potluck scheduled for March 28th, but since we're not able to meet here at the Kiwanis International Building, we'll be just down the road at the Caribbean Cove. We've had to cancel that potluck. There will be choir practice next Sabbath from 1:30 to 2 o'clock. And tomorrow morning, the Indianapolis Board of Directors will meet at 9 a.m. at the Bridgefield Villas Clubhouse. If you have any questions on that, please see Mr. Sam Reynolds. There is a note there about the night to be much remembered. At this point, we've had a sign-up list out for the last couple of weeks asking if anybody would be interested in getting together, probably here at this location for the night to be much remembered. The turnout, I think the number is somewhere around 12 or so. It'd probably be a little bit higher than that, but if that's all our numbers are going to be, we're not going to be able to have the catered meal here. So I wanted to let you know that. We'll put the sign-up list out for today. If there's not a significant higher number that signs up, we'll probably go ahead and cancel having the catered meal here, but I'll let you know next Sabbath. I think that takes care of all the announcements. We'll go ahead and have another hymn, and then the sermon will be given by Mr. Darris McNeely.
Well, let's go ahead and take our hymnal once again and stand. And we'll turn to page 27 if you're using one. God is our refuge, page 27. God is our refuge and our strength, in strength's a present aid. Therefore, although the earth be moved, we will not be afraid. Though hills amidst the seas be glass, though waters roaring make, and trouble be, yea, though the hills my swelling seas to shake. A river is whose streams make glad the city of our God, the holy place wherein the Lord Most High has his abode. God in the midst of her doth dwell, and nothing shall her move. The Lord to her a helper will, and hath right earthly through. Thank you very much. Please be seated. For the sermon today, guest speaker, Mr. Darris McNeely.
Thank you, Mr. McNeely. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to be with all of you here. Once again, good to come home to Indianapolis. Always good to get back over here. We left early enough yesterday to be here in plenty of time. Had an hour traffic delay around the loop at Cincinnati before we ever got out of there. Then we got stuck in another delay on the south side loop of here in Indianapolis, but made it here, and you just have to kind of roll with the punches and just keep right on going, kind of like the choir. Chris Herman has done that before. I've heard him give that over when the choir was first doing their piece here this year, and I thought, man, get through all the books of the Bible to sing that, one thing in itself, and then, every time you go someplace else and technical problems can cause glitches, but I thought Chris handled it really well, and sailed right through the adversity there, and which is something you have to do. And Ken Shoemaker is just always an enthusiastic choir director. And that's the first time I've seen him knock over a music stand while he's conducting it. It may not be the last, but it was a first for me. But he just picked it right up and kept on going and sailed right on through. And you got to roll the punches and don't get too upset and too flustered. That kind of a week for us at ABC. I was giving a test yesterday in class. Every Friday morning in the World News and Prophecy class, I give them a current events quiz, and it's their highlight of the week. I tell you, they just love it, but they know to expect it, and so it's teaching them to either learn, watch world news, or keep up current events, and or just ignore the teacher. I'm not quite sure yet. We're working our way through that class. But yesterday's class, I put the slide up with the first question, and I had the answer in the question. And I don't even know how I did that. It was late at night when I was putting it together, and so I had my own technical glitch that I had to kind of pick up and move on from. So, the moral, the lesson for us all to learn is when something happens, you just keep right on going and act like it never happened, and hopefully get through it all. We have a very good ABC class this year. It's a smaller one than last year, and that reflects in the choir, but not any less so in the quality of their presentation and their heart. But we're enjoying getting to know one another as we go through the year. It will be over very, very quickly. But ABC is I think, this year we changed our name from the Ambassador Bible Center to the Ambassador Bible College. And other than the name, I think one of the reasons for that was to hopefully look a little better as we're trying to get a status definition with either something to do with the government, homeland security, or whatever, so that it will hopefully be easier for some of international students to come in, especially from Africa, where we have not been able to get them in recent years. So we hope that will happen. We've had a visit from Homeland Security, and they checked us out and made sure we're not radioactive and terrorist threats and everything else. So we were waiting on a determination in regard to that. I mentioned that we had this past Council of Elders meeting, they had a report given to them from a committee of the council and subcommittee that had been working for several months on kind of evaluating the Ambassador Bible College. 16 years in operation, and we never had a thorough evaluation. So a group of educators and faculty members and others were put together in several meetings held during the past year, and a report with some recommendations was brought to the council this past week when the Council of Elders was meeting. And out of that, we hope that we will be able to have it's been good to go through a review of the curriculum, the mission of the college, and the center, and kind of look at everything. And I think it will give us a basis to make annual reviews of everything, and hopefully continue to improve the curriculum and matters that we're dealing with there. But it has borne fruit. One of the things that we determined from it is that it has helped to create an atmosphere of service among those who have gone through ABC. I was noting, as I was listening to the report in the council session the other day, that some of the complaints from certain areas where they send ABC students to ABC and they don't go home, they stay in Cincinnati. And it kind of looks like a lot of them do, but really the majority of students over the 16 years have gone home or to other places. It's just that because it looks like we got a lot over there that they have all stayed around, and more have stayed than in other areas because of the nature of that. They stay around for a number of reasons. So I did note that that of all the ones that had gone from Indianapolis through the years, as far as I know, every one of them came back here and integrated quite well into the service to the church and the congregation, and went on with other degrees and jobs and careers and lives. And it was good to note, at least from a local perspective as well. One other thing I wanted to mention, we are working in the media department toward the September-October period where we are going to be changing the name of the Good News Magazine to Beyond Today Magazine. That was announced some weeks back, and I won't comment too much about that, but we are working towards September-October being the time when we do that. There are several things that have to be done, and one of the big work items is to design a new logo for Beyond Today that will fit on the television screen, on the computer screen, and on a magazine. And that is sorely been needed because the original Beyond Today logo was done just for television 10 years ago, and it doesn't work right graphically with other applications, print or especially the web. And so we've narrowed it down, and I believe we have a firm that's going to help us to design a new logo for Beyond Today, and also a church logo as well. Not the seal that I think you have a seal up here, but that stays the same, but the church logo that appears on our letterheads and mastheads, it will be redesigned. And we will put the Beyond Today name on the magazine. And in addition, we're working to redesign the magazine, the layout of the magazine, and to create additional features, columns, and articles within the magazine. It's still going to carry the same doctrinal teaching and emphasis that it always has, and be very, very familiar in that way. But we are going to be redesigning the magazine and creating additional features that will help us to convey the message. So we're working quite a bit on that, and that's going to be occupying our time going forward, and hopefully will be seen by all of you when it comes to the name being put on the magazine here in the fall. So it's going to be more than just swapping out names. We hope that it will also give us an opportunity to put a kind of a fresh approach to a number of different things that will appear internally within the magazine as well. So those are some of the things that we're involved with in the media department and ABC. If you will, please turn in your Bibles over to the book of Daniel, chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3 opens with an interesting scene. We see three men who stand bound by ropes in front of a roaring furnace of fire. For these three men, it was a moment of truth. They were going to live or die. It had come down to that point. The only question for them to determine was, what would they do? Would they live or would they die? And in Daniel chapter 3 and verse 16, we come to the core of the story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. That's confidence. That's grace under pressure. But in verse 18, they then go on and to make an even deeper point. But if not, three words, but if not. In other words, if he doesn't spare us and rescue us, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. They had complete confidence that God was able to save them, even at that moment as they saw the flames and felt the heat of this furnace, and knew the wrath of the king was hot as well, because they would not bow down to a giant gold image that he had erected and demanded everyone bow and pay homage to. And they felt that God could deliver them even at that moment, but if he didn't, if not, it wasn't going to change what they did. Now, how did these three men get to this moment? And what are the lessons for you and I as we look at this? We know the story. It may have been a while since some of us have kind of opened up to Daniel and read this particular story in chapter 3. But let's look at a little bit of the background that led them here as we look at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Makes a cute, not alliterative, but kind of the three words just trip along real well, and you could almost make a song out of it if you wanted to, I suppose, to help remember their names. But it's more than a song. It's more than a cute little Bible story that we take out of the Old Testament. It's a story that has direct implications and application for you and I today in any and everything we face in our own life. These three men had found themselves transported to an alien culture. They might as well have been put on a different planet, to have been taken from Jerusalem to Babylon in their day. For you and I, to go whatever distance that was, is nothing in our modern world. But for them in the ancient world, they might as well have gone to the moon. The contrast was completely different in terms of religion, culture, atmosphere, and everything that they were used to. They had been uprooted from their familiar land and gone through a change that very few people could put up with. They had seen their city burned, their temple destroyed, their way of life, their religion denigrated, and they had to put everything they had on their backs or in a cart and be transported to a different land. And then this particular group of people, along with one other, Daniel, we read in the first chapter of Daniel, did find themselves, when they got off the train, they went to the right. Somebody kind of motioned that they go to a different direction than perhaps the other refugees went to. And they wound up, through the circumstances, working in the palace and in kind of the State Department of Babylon in their governmental functions because of the training and ability and testing scores that they came up with. And they found themselves in unique positions. But now, these three men in the story, when you go back to the verse 1 of chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar, being the despotic man that he was, had let the episode probably of chapter 2 where Daniel interpreted his dream that he had of an image. And in that, Daniel told him, well, you're this head of gold, Nebuchadnezzar. And so likely Nebuchadnezzar, being the personality that he was, decided, well, if I'm the head of gold, let's just make a whole statue full of gold. And I'm going to command everybody to bow down to it. And if they don't, then into the furnace of fire with them, which is how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got there. They would not bow down to this golden image. And because of the envy in some of the others in the Babylonian court, they were reported, they were hauled before the king, and they were given a second chance to recant and change their mind and bow down at the sound of the music, and they wouldn't do it. And this is how they found themselves here. At this moment, quite likely, as far as their mind was concerned, their last moment. A good story, but a story that has some big lessons for us. What do we learn? What can we learn from this story? Let's pause for a moment in the flow of the story here and kind of leave them at the mouth of that fiery furnace and consider it. First of all, this is a story of idolatry, plain and simple. One of the classic ones that we would find from the ancient world, of an image being made, crafted, and created by, in this case, the king, after a very familiar pattern. The Babylonian religion had all kinds of idols that people bowed down to, as did all the other cultures of the ancient world, made of stone, made of wood, made of glass, made of, as in this case, of precious metal. And they all had one thing in common. All of the idols of the ancient world, no matter what they looked like, no matter what they were made from, they all had one thing in common. They could not see, hear, nor speak. Couldn't have a relationship with an idol. You couldn't expect an answer from that idol. You couldn't walk necessarily with that idol, which is why God said to his people Israel throughout their whole history that led up to this point, don't do it. I'm your God. I brought you out of Egypt. Come to know me. We will have a relationship. We will have a relationship that you obey me and I will bless you. And you will know that I am God. Didn't I show you the worthlessness of the gods of Egypt? And this was the story of Israel. And of course, they didn't learn it. And that's why these three men wound up in Babylon. And in their own case, because they did not compromise their integrity, they found themselves standing before a fiery furnace. It would have been very easy for Daniel and these three men to have come to a conclusion. You know what? Our hometown's gone. The church we grew up in is gone. The building that we went to every occasion no longer exists. Therefore, they could have concluded, our God. There is no God anymore. Certainly not the God we heard about growing up. Let's just go ahead and adapt ourselves to the Babylonian culture. It would have been very easy for these men to have given in. They were captives in a strange land. Their parents or their friends or their community that kind of was a bond and a cohesive feature of their life was no longer there any longer. Everything they had believed in had been swept away by this pagan power. It would have been easy to blend in and to succeed. And now, especially with their lives on the line, how would you and I have reacted to that moment? That's the question for us. The Life Application Bible, which I know many of us have copies of, in their commentary on this part of the passage, they have an interesting 8 excuses that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could have gone to and used. Let me just give you what the Life Application Bible says, which would have given these men one more chance. Number one, they say that they could have said and used as an excuse, well, we'll bow down, but not actually worship the idol. We'll just go through the motions, but in our heart, we won't worship the idol. Excuse number 2, we won't become idol worshipers, but we'll do it this one time. Then we'll ask God for forgiveness. Easier to get grace than permission, right? Excuse number 3. Well, the king has absolute power and we must obey him. God will understand. God will understand. Human reason works that way sometimes. Human reason tells us at times that we have a better read on what God's mind is than someone else might have. And we bend it to our purpose. Excuse number 4 they could have used. Well, the king appointed us. We owe this to him. We owe him this. Number 5, this is a foreign land, so God will excuse us for following the customs of the land. Instead of when in Rome, do as the Romans do, when in Babylon, do as the Babylonians do, the way that works. Number 6, they could have said our ancestors set up idols in God's temple. This isn't half as bad, which is what happened. Excuse number 7, they could have said, well, we're not hurting anybody. It's our life. It's our call. It's our decision. It's not going to hurt anybody. That's a very modern excuse, right? And excuse number 8, if we get ourselves killed and some heathens take our positions, they won't help our people in exile. So 8 excuses they could have used to have saved their life and to have walked away. And all they would have had to have done is figure it out in their own mind how to excuse it, justify it, and with it. Which again takes some mental gymnastics, but I think every one of us have done that at times or been tempted to do it and find ourselves at that moment, don't we, where we may find ourselves making an excuse for something rather than just acknowledging sin or guilt and repenting and doing what is necessary to move on and to move forward from it. So it's a story of idolatry, pure and simple, in its rawest form, and the despotism that is right here. When you look at a man like Nebuchadnezzar, and he was a conflicted man. Obviously, in chapter 2, Daniel revealed secrets of his dream to him, and acknowledges Daniel's God and puts Daniel over a portion of his kingdom. In chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar is going to do that again because he has another dream. And again, he comes through circumstances to make an acknowledgement of Daniel's God, which was quite a bit for the type of man that he was and the king that he was in that day and in that age and that neighborhood. Babylon was an interesting neighborhood to live within. Right there in the center of empires that had come and gone already, and now the Babylonian Empire of Nebuchadnezzar had risen to the point where it would give birth to not only its own time, but for all successive empires that would come out of that region would owe something to that head of gold, which was Babylon, according to the interpretation of the dream there. That is the area today that we see being the fulcrum of the current strife in the Middle East and what is modern day Iraq. That's ancient Babylon. That's where Nebuchadnezzar stood. That's where the city of Babylon was. And in the northern part of Iraq is where, in recent months, this group called ISIS has been on a rampage doing unspeakable acts of horror that we see confronting us today, of beheadings, even down to the point, as they did a few weeks ago, where they burned a man alive in a cage, a Jordanian pilot who had been down. I didn't see it, except I saw a picture of it, a still picture. I didn't care to look it up and see it, but I saw the still picture of it. And that in itself was horrible enough. But as bad as that is, and that group today, look, the story we read here in Babylon, 3 men of faith were going to be burned alive too by an evil-minded system. Kind of makes you realize that whatever spiritual realm was working in the time of Nebuchadnezzar that would inspire him to rule with such horror, probably still around the neighborhood today, to inspire the same acts now that the whole world must witness if they choose on social media by a group of renegades and pure unspeakable evil being done there in the name of of religion, a caliphate. Same neighborhood, same gods with a small g at work influencing these matters. This is the area, this is a mindset, and this is what is happening in this story. There's another lesson for us to consider with this. As we look at this lesson of idolatry, I always like to bring it down. What does it mean to us today? What might our idols be that we are challenged and tempted to bow down to? I don't think anybody in this room is going to be tempted to bow down to a gold image or to a porcelain statue hanging on a wall or a wooden statue or whatever. We have moved way far away from that in our Church of God culture, and certainly in our modern world, that is not of the same particular fashion. Now there are religions with idols hanging on walls and icons that they do worship. That's true. But for you and I, and for a good portion of the world, idolatry takes on a bit of a different cast and a different measure. Tolerance is today's phrase that's used to mold the values and shape the behavior of a generation of people today. For you and I, desirous of holding on to godly values, biblical values, every day we face pressures to tolerate, to accept things that were once considered sin. Same-sex marriage, for instance. Ask yourself how your attitude, especially those of us of the boomer generation, has been tempted to be shifted and changed in the last 20 years because of what we see. We can't watch or view anything of any length of time, it seems, without being confronted either sometimes directly or subtly with a character, a situation meant to cause us to be sympathetic towards something that is sin. Couples living together without unmarried, rampant throughout our culture today. Children born out of wedlock and how things have changed. I even use that term, and it's different from the term that I grew up with. But it has shifted. Abortion, drugs, even the culture of violence that we live in. These are some of the measures and the changes in our culture that bombard us all the time. And depending on how we have been acclimatized to it, we might even have to admit that perhaps we have become a bit more tolerant than we would like to admit. There's sacred issues in today's postmodern culture, that's for sure. They are many of the modern forms of idolatry that people are being pressured to bow down to and to accept. And that's a part of life today. You look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel and some of the things that they had to stand up for, they wouldn't do too well in our schools or businesses today. They would be sent immediately to a class for diversity training. It just would happen. They wouldn't be there. But those are some of the idols that we have in our larger culture. As I was looking at this topic and thinking about it and preparing it, I thought to myself, well, dare I bring it even closer down to home for us? Into the Church of God culture? And list a few idols that we might have in our Church of God culture? Surely we don't have any idols in our Church of God culture, do we? Well, how about legalism? Is legalism an idol that is a part of our culture at times? It is if you ever think that anything you do, any part of your obedience to God, your necessary obedience to God, merits grace or merits or earns salvation. That anything we do as part of our worship merits and earns salvation or God's grace. If you think that, legalism may be a part of your thinking, and sometimes that can cause a bit of, it can frankly be idolatry, because we look at something that we might do, some work of our own, as something that substitutes for the work of God and the grace of Christ and the mercy of God, which is free and unmerited and undeserved, and whenever God gives it to us. But if we think that something we do earns us anything in those areas, it is a form of legalism. And when it raises its head, as it does from time to time, it's uncomfortable, but it's necessary for us to ask ourselves, why do we do what we do? And if we think that we are earning anything, and we then begin to use it as kind of a crutch or a cane or a stick that we beat somebody else up with, then that might be one of our own Church of God idols. Then I thought about another idol that sometimes raises its head in our culture, and it's called pride. The pride that I'm right because I'm in God's church. I know the truth, and we have this in-speak that we use, that that we are very pleased with in one sense. And yes, there is truth, and yes, there is the truth of God, and there is the calling of God, and yes, there is a matter of conversion. But then if we let that get us to the point where we think that I'm more right than you, and I'm more right than anyone else, and it comes out in the way we speak of the world, we speak of others, then we have a problem. Because we think of ourselves a bit more righteous than we really are. And we think of what God has given us in a way that separates us and doesn't really fill us with the love of God. And if that happens and creates a pride and an overbearing, condescending approach toward people in the way we speak, think, write, communicate the words of the gospel, then we might have a problem, because it can create a separation. We need to be careful about that. Sometimes we look at it that way. Even men can be an idol in our Church of God culture. Our Achilles heel through the years has been putting men on pedestals, worshiping them instead of God, even at times to allowing that to cause the body of Christ to be split. And that is one of I call it our Achilles heel at times, that we have, times just never been able to get rid of. I think any man who has allowed himself to be looked at as that way, as someone who must lead the people of God or be worshipped in that way, is really no different than Nebuchadnezzar is here in this story, where he built an image, very likely parroting himself, and commanded people to bow down to it. Men can be a form of idolatry in our own culture as well. We need to be careful about that. We worship God. In Deuteronomy 6, this, among other passages, tells us, verse 4, Deuteronomy 6, very famous part of this passage. Hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Christ repeated this in the New Testament to be the great commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your might, heart, and strength. And let nothing come between that, not even our own pride, not even our own standard of legalism. And certainly not any other physical matter that we might bow down to, all of which are idolatry. Don't let that happen. And ask and make sure that we don't have any idols lurking around in our life today. There's a third lesson to learn from this story, and that is a question to ask ourselves: how real is God's promise to us? How real is the promise of God? When we go back to the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego there, they said to Nebuchadnezzar, our God is able to deliver us from your hand, from this furnace. That's faith. That was a statement of faith. And it can apply to you and I at any time when we would make a statement in our heart about how we're going to put our faith in God to deliver us from a trial, to fight a battle for us in a challenging passage of life, to heal us when we are sick, face and put our life in his hands and call upon God in faith and trust. He's promised to heal us. Faith takes many shapes and forms as it conforms to the needs of our life. And we profess that very readily and very sincerely, just like these men do. Our God is able to do what needs to be done, and we will say that, and we will live by that. And then what they said, though, but if not, in other words, if he doesn't physically deliver us at this moment, and you push us on into the furnace, we're still not going to worship you or bow down to your image. We're not going to compromise. We're not going to give in on any part of our faith, belief, way of life. Not one. That's what they were saying. They were willing to go all the way. And in their mind, they had resolved that they're going to trust God, believe God, obey God, put his way of life first, not give in to whatever might be the temptation to walk away from. And as I've stressed and traced, their own real life at that moment would have given them more than 8 or 10 excuses. They probably could have come up with 15 or 20 excuses as to why it would have been all right to bow down, to go along. And they wouldn't do it. And they resolved in their heart, which is something you and I can only do in the darkest moment of the night, in the quietest moment in our own private place of prayer, our bedroom, our living room, where we go, our backyard, our little favorite spot where we may walk and talk with God and walk with God literally and come to certain conclusions in faith. And in a moment we resolve. Thus is the way it will be. But if not, no turning back. No turning back. No turning back. The great definition of faith is, when we read the book of Hebrews, that faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen, Hebrews 11 and verse 1. You look at that phrase again, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. There are tangible things right there in that sentence. The substance of things hoped for. Substantive matters represent our faith. And there is evidence for our faith. There is evidence for the way we choose to live our lives, that it is the best way, a good way, that has many, many benefits that we have lived and understood and experienced in our life, and would make us to not want to go any other direction, to live any other way of life, regardless of all the ups and downs and the seasons of life that come about. There's substance and there's evidence in our life that we've pinned it all upon. It's not just something that is vague and ephemeral and unknown, unknowable, or unseeable. There's substance and there's evidence there. The fourth thing that we can learn from the story is that it's in those 3 words, but if not. And it is that faith has consequences. When we make our decision, when we choose to put God first, that faith can have consequences, and we should be able to live with that and know that. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew God could deliver them, and they knew that by personal example. They had read the Scriptures. They knew the Scriptures. We read the Bible, and we have personal experience too, which informs our faith. As we look at our life, others that we know within the faith, we have a great deal of personal experience. If we're walking with God, seeing his hand in our life, through prayer and through a continual study of the Word of God, letting it wash over us, nourish us, remind us of many things. That not enough can be said for our reading of the Bible, our study of the Bible on a regular basis, on an ongoing basis, reviewing, rereading books and passages that we have read and heard and know, we think, many times, and even in the most obscure parts that we don't think are there. You know, all of us probably love to read the Psalms for comfort, encouragement, or read a proverb for wisdom, or to, you know, if we really want to go into kind of a semi-graduate level, we'll read the book of Romans and let Paul's windings through theology at times inform us about grace. How often do we pick up the book of Exodus and read through the last 10 or 15 chapters at the building of the ark in the wilderness? Except maybe on a quick pass through with an annual Bible reading program. Or some other passage that we don't often think to turn to. But you know what? Those even can be instructive to us about what God is and what he's doing at various times. You never know, which is why whether it's an annual reading program that we put ourselves through or some other systematic approach to it, as we read the Bible, it is a continual shoring up of our faith, coupled with our experiences, and even helping us to understand that whatever we might be going through at a particular point in time. I mentioned because the building of the tabernacle in the wilderness, you know, to be honest, I hadn't read that for a long time. Then reading through it a few days ago, and it, you know, I had to coincide with something else that was going on, and I realized, hey, yeah, that's what we're doing now. That's what's going on right now when I go to work, as I interact and engaged with the others in the work of the church. That's what's going on now. God's word has many different facets to it, and the ability to inform us, encourage us, inspire us, and just keep us in the way without being taken off someplace else. This is what these three men knew as they came to that particular moment in their life. Their faith was strengthened. And you and I have that as well. We live each day with decisions of faith that we have to make regarding God's way, the Sabbath, this entire way of life. Maybe it's health, maybe it's sickness or a disease that will test us just how far we will go. In the book of Romans, chapter 5, there's a passage that helps us to understand this and the things that we go through in the trials and what it brings us to. Beginning in verse 1, he talks about being justified by faith. We have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom also we have access by faith into this grace in which we stand and rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. Faith, grace, peace, a justification, being made right with God, brings us into a relationship with God that in two verses can sum up 40 years of one's experience, or 30 years or 20 years of experience in the faith. But then in verse 3, he goes on and he says, and not only that, there's more to it, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance. We glory in a trial. Now, we glory in a trial not by jumping up and down and saying, whoopee, a trial has come. We glory in it in that we deal with it and we face it head on, kind of like these three young men did. We face it head on. And we stay firmly in our faith as a result of it, knowing that that trial will produce perseverance. We stay with it, we will have a quality of character that is called perseverance or stick-to-itiveness. The ability to stay with it is ingrained within our nature. And we learn that, we can deal with this. It's bad, it's tough, it's unpleasant, it hurts, but I can deal with this. There is tomorrow. There's the next day. There is life beyond this. And as a result of that perseverance, it builds a character. a sterling spiritual character. And as we go through it and come to a point, either the trial passes, a season passes, there's a healing, there's a new job, there's a different job. The trial and the difficulty, whatever it might be, fades. And the sun does come out. Then what is left is hope in verse 4. Hope. And hope's a good thing. Hope is a great thing. Hope is what we then must have and what anchors our lives. Because he says hope does not disappoint in verse 5, because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who was given to us. Hope does not disappoint. And we have got to live with hope. I was reading a book several months ago, and there was a great line in that book by the author talking about the state of our world, our modern world in many ways. And he said that when there's no hope, the only thing left is Prozac. And think about it. When you lose hope, boy, you've lost a lot. And for some, Prozac is the only solution. But hope stabilizes. Hope keeps us connected with God. Hope does not disappoint. But hope comes as a result of character being built, perseverance, and yes, a difficult situation. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had hope. They had hope that was being tested at that particular point in their life. Now, there's a couple of takeaways, I think, that we can glean from the story back in Deuteronomy, or in Daniel. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 3 and wrap this up with a couple of points to take home with us. Daniel chapter 3. We left them in verse 18 basically saying we're not going to do this. God can deliver us, but if not, we're still not going to bow down. Well, Nebuchadnezzar's fury was fueled and enraged. He commanded the furnace to be heated up 7 times more. The 3 men were bound in their coats and their trousers, and brought up closer to the furnace, and they were cast, verse 21, into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And so hot that the ones who threw them in were killed as a result of that. And they fell down bound, verse 23, into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste, and he spoke, saying to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire?" And they answered and said to the king, "True, O king." "Well, look," he answered, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." 3 were thrown in. Nebuchadnezzar then saw 4, and the 4th one, he said, was like the Son of God. One like God. Fiery furnace. The Bible has other things to say about a fiery trial that might come upon us. But in the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had resolve, and they would not compromise. You know, our walk with God will take many different paths as we go through our life. We might have a nice garden path on many occasions, very, very pleasant, very level, well tended and cultivated, to walk through a field, through a wooded area, nicely kept garden path. We might have a period or a time where we're walking in what has been called broad sunlit uplands, where the sun and the sky is as big as you please, and it's a calm spring day, and it's beautiful, and it's a joy to be alive. And then sometimes we might walk down the yellow brick road, and you never know who you're going to run into next along that way. And then sometimes we might have to walk through a time of fiery trial, or a valley of the shadow of death, as Psalm 23 tells us. Our walk with God can take many different forms. in many different ways. And to walk with God, this is the point. These three men, in a sense, were in a fire walking with God. For you and I, the lesson is that if we're going to, at times as we walk with God, we might sometimes have to walk through fire and still walk with him. He's still there with us, just as he was with these three men. And if we have not compromised, if we have come to a point like they did where we're going to say, but if not, then we will see God and we will know that he is with us in that trial. It is always encouraging as a minister to listen to someone who is facing death in their own way, and they see God's hand at every step, every part of the trial that they are walking. And as you have seen that with our friends, fellow members, to listen to them, it's always a humbling lesson that I ask, will I have that type of an attitude? Will I see God in that decision that comes down? Will I see God in this dead end that we might be facing? Will I see God leading me in whatever way? I've had a number of different examples through the years of people who have had their reactions as they have walked through the fire and have been a testimony and an example that I have from, as have you. To walk with God, we sometimes have to walk through fire. This is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to learn, and that's a big lesson for us here. There's a second lesson to take away from this story. If you go back here in Daniel 3, you see that when they were thrown in, they were bound. Would have been with ropes, bound within their clothing and thrown in. But when Nebuchadnezzar looks in, he sees them walking around, unsinged, unhurt, unburned. But they're walking around. They were thrown in, remember, because they were carried to that point and shoved in. When he sees them, they're walking around, but it's as if they were just kind of, taking a sauna, walking around in a sauna. Whatever had bound them didn't bind them anymore. Sometimes it takes a severe trial to burn off or to release you and I from the bonds that have shackled us in our life. Think about that. We all have various things that might bind us up emotionally, keeping us emotionally immature, years or decades in our life because of something that happened at some point in our life that formed our character, personality. Sometimes it's sin. Sometimes it's our sin. Maybe it was somebody else's sin and its impact upon us that has bound us and impacted us in some way. Does fear bind you today? Does doubt bind you? Does cynicism, a lack of trust? What is it that binds you? Insecurity? We all have various ropes around us, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And sometimes it will take a fiery trial in life that we persevere through and we build character in, and we maintain our hope, Paul wrote, to burn off, to remove that shackle, that rope of fear or doubt that has bound us for years, which is another reason for us to face a trial with faith and with confidence. And if we endure through it and stay with God, stay with faith, then he will and can bring us to a point where we understand that even in the worst time, we've been walking with him. And when that happens, we maintain and continue with our hope. But to get to that point, we must not bend to any idol. We must not let anything cause us to compromise with our relationship with God and come between us. We must worship him in spirit and in truth continually and never bend to any idea, any statement, any form of idolatry, old or new, that can come between us and our relationship with God. So that when we come down to our moment of truth, we will be able to say, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Our God is a great God. He has been with us all of our lives, and he is able to deliver us from yet another time of difficulty and pain and suffering and trial. But if not, we're still not going to give in. We will not turn back. Can we all come to that point and make those three words the words that are emblazoned in our hearts? But if not.
We'll go ahead and take our hymnals and stand one last time as we close out services today. Sing one last hymn. On page 175, Onward Christian Soldiers, after which will be led in the closing prayer today by Mr. Wes Perlin, and also ask the blessing over our meal potluck after this. Page 175, Onward Christian Soldiers.
Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the word of Jesus going on before. Christ the royal master leads against the foe, forward into battle, see his banners go. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the word of Jesus going on before. Like a mighty army moves the church of God. Brothers, we are treading where the saints have trod. We are not divided, all one body we, one in hope and doctrine, one in charity. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the word of Jesus going on before. Thrones and thrones may perish, kingdoms rise and wane, but the church of Jesus constant will remain. Gates of hell can never against that church prevail. We have Christ's own promise, which can never fail. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the word of Jesus going on before. Onward then, ye people, join our happy throng, blend with ours your voices in the triumph song. Glory, laud, and honor unto Christ the King. Yes, through countless ages, men and angels sing. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the word of Jesus going on before.
For the closing prayer, Mr. Wes Perlin.
Eternal Father, we thank you so much for sharing your beautiful word with us today, for bringing your speakers to deliver your word and for the beautiful music that we heard today from ABC Chorale. We thank you so much. We thank you most of all for the calling that you've given us. We ask today that you'll bless the food that we're going to have this afternoon and conversation, and that you'll see us safely home and then back here next Sabbath. And we pray all this in Jesus'